Hello, my gentle and of course very modern apes. My name is Erica. I'm Gutsick host of this channel that you found yourself on, and what we do here is we look at cool science topics with regard to biological anthropology, primatology, paleontology, zoology generally, and sometimes we look at these subjects through the lens of pseudoscience, specifically debunking pseudoscience, and typically that pseudoscience is young Earth creationism. This is kind of my what we do here intro that I've been testing out for the past couple videos. I hope you like it. If you don't tell me. I was searching for content this afternoon and I realized that our old friends Genesis Apologetics has come out with a brand new series, or at least it's brand new to me. I've only just happened upon it, and I thought it would be fun to go over this series in its entirety today. Their new series is a collection of very short videos, like 2 minutes long or less, where a teacher brings up a subject related to evolutionary theory or the age of the Earth, and then one of the smarter, younger kids in the class confronts the evil teacher with a cool and thought-provoking creationist counter-question. I find this series particularly tantalizing because I myself am a teacher of sorts. So I'm a PhD student at my university, but in order to pay for tuition, or basically to get my tuition written off, I also TA. So I teach biological anthropology lab, and biological anthropology is like a class about human evolution and evolutionary theory effectively. I also teach in a conservative southern state, which is like the breeding ground for evolution-denying folks in the modern era. And a lot of the students that end up in my class are like 18 to 19-year-old non-STEM majors. So I'm like the prime target for these questions. I'm the individual who will probably see these questions in class if anybody is going to see them. The only one who outmatches me is probably like high school biology teachers. So I thought, why not test the robusticity of these questions? How would I answer a student in my class who brought these up to me in a classroom setting? And that last portion is kind of key because if these were brought up in class while I was teaching, an answer would have to be relatively concise. Brevity is not a strong suit of mine. I'm known for being a bit long-winded, especially when talking about things that I think are very interesting. So this is a nice little test for me. I want to test myself to see if I can answer these questions relatively quickly, because in a classroom setting, you'll be teaching a subject, someone will ask a question, and your job as the teacher is to answer it and then get back to the material at hand, ideally weaving that question into teaching the material as you continue introducing it for the day. My teaching contract does not include systematically annihilating creationist claims in the classroom, so can we sufficiently address these questions and then move on, like, quickly? But I thought this might be useful to you guys as well, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide short answers to tough creationist questions. And given some of you out there might have family members who are creationists or friends who are creationists, you might find this helpful. Unfortunately, Genesis Apologetics does not have access to the PR and thumbnail guy that works for Answers in Genesis, because their playlist is just titled Classroom. Nothing sparks curiosity like a simple noun. My interest is piqued. Now, I'll tell you ahead of time, some of these are interesting to me and are things that I might actually be asked in class, and some of them are not. For example, I'm not going to be going over, is the Bible reliable, abiogenesis when non-living matter becomes alive, the hearing system, or where did God come from? These are a little bit outside of my pay grade, I would say. So we're going to be going over relevant questions to human evolution and evolution generally. So first up on our list is a video titled Darwin's Finches and Evolution Classroom Series. I have a feeling that's going to be, that's all of them, right? They're all in the series.
So, on the Galapagos, Darwin found that finch beaks and their feet varied island by island, proving evolution because nature was selecting the fittest birds to survive and reproduce.
I'm going to kind of time myself when answering the students' questions, but we will always point out when the teacher is starting off with incorrect information. You don't prove evolution. You don't prove anything in science. You provide support for a hypothesis by using the scientific method. This is pretty straightforward stuff that one might learn in a high school biology setting like the one being depicted here.
I don't think that proves evolution. It just simply shows that the finches' beaks were adapting to their food sources on that specific island.
Well, that's an interesting note, Heather, but it does make me worry that you're not attending lecture because that is evolution. It's natural selection, one of the many mechanisms of evolution acting upon natural mutation within a population. This creates a change in allelic frequency in a population of organisms, in this case the finches, over time because you've got differential reproductive success occurring in these finches. Some of the finches have the mutation that gives them an edge when it comes to acquiring resources like food, which allows them to grow bigger, live longer, reproduce more often, and pass these genes on to their offspring. That is evolution. And then I would pull out my copy of Origin, which every evolutionist is actually required to keep on their person at all times, and I would say to her, this is something that Darwin noted himself. In fact, it was kind of what predicated the entire theory of evolution. Who are you getting this information from? Because it sounds like they have an incorrect definition of what evolution is, or perhaps they're trying to change the definition to fit some kind of agenda. You can speak to me after class if you have more questions.
There was a 2017 article in the science journal BMC Evolutionary Biology, and they found that they weren't actually mutating and evolving by mutations and natural selection. Instead, it was epigenetic changes, which is special coding that allows the animals to track and adapt to their environments without changing the DNA, and it happens in just one generation. So it was never evolution. Really cool.
Clarence, I'm afraid you might have misunderstood the study, or at least misconstrued what the study population was, because with regard to the Galapagos finches, we've managed to narrow it down to specific genes that are responsible for corresponding changes in the beak size and shape of the various finches that live on the island. And this doesn't mean that epigenetics isn't at play, it always is, but with regard to the major changes, this is evolution through natural selection, full stop. Then I would probably just Google on my projector on screen in front of the entire class and show that, yeah, we do know the gene that is responsible for beak shape. It's called ALX1. Then I'd probably go back to the paper and I would scroll down to the abstract just to see what it is that the paper is actually saying. And I would note that the second sentence says, however, growing evidence suggests that epigenetic mechanisms such as DNA methylation may also be involved in rapid adaptation to new environments. May also be, as in addition to normal run-of-the-mill mutation and natural selection. And then Clarence's classmates would likely point and laugh at him for making such a silly mistake. Next up is a question on the Laetoli footprints, which are a trackway made by Australopiths in Tanzania. And what's cool about this one is I actually do teach about the Laetoli footprints specifically in my lab, so let's hear it.
We know our early ancestors, like Lucy, were walking upright because we found her footprints in Tanzania.
When I teach the Laetoli footprints, I usually talk about the footprints last after we've talked about the rest of the Australopith morphology, so the characteristics that designate bipedalism. The four that we tend to cover are the anterior foramen magnum, the valgus knee, the sagittally oriented ilia, so the blades of the pelvis, and the foot morphology, so including things like an inline big toe and 3 arches in the foot. You guys have heard this a million times, so let's see what happens next.
Wait a minute, weren't those footprints like 1,000 miles away from where Lucy was found?
Yeah, give or take.
Clarence, the Laetoli footprints are at least made up of 2 individuals walking in a trackway, and that's just the primary trackway that we tend to consider. There are other hominin trackways at Laetoli, at the site. Are you perhaps implying that the footprints were made by Lucy the specimen? Because that would be incorrect and something that no one ever on the history of the planet has ever proposed, except maybe creationists incorrectly.
Well, how big were her foot fossils?
Well, they didn't actually find Lucy's hands or feet.
Perhaps you were browsing TikTok when we discussed the morphologic characteristics that allow humans to be bipedal that we find in the dozens and dozens and dozens of Australopith remains that let us know they were bipedal outside of the feet specifically. But it seems you also missed our discussion of some of the Australopith feet specimens that we have, such as STW 573, literally named Littlefoot.
Well, so how big were the actual Tanzania footprints?
About 10 inches long.
That's how big my feet are, and I only wear a 9.5.
Well, now listen, it depends on which of the hominins we're talking about, since there was more than one hominin at the site, but I've heard estimates of around 7 to 8 inches. Ricky, if you put your disgusting feet on the table again, I'm gonna ask you to leave.
So wait a minute, so they never found her feet, but Lucy, a 3.5 foot tall person, made 10-inch long footprints 1,000 miles away? If you ask me, it sounds like the story that Lucy walked upright is lacking some evidence based on the Tanzania footprints.
Well, Clarence, again, no one has ever proposed that the Laetoli footprints were made by Lucy, the individual specimen, but moreover, there are other indications that Australopiths were in fact bipedal outside of the morphology of the foot, which we also have in other specimens that aren't specifically Lucy, which is again not relevant because no one proposes Lucy made the Laetoli footprints, such as the anterior foramen magnum, the valgus knee, the sagittally oriented iliac blades, and of course aspects of the foot morphology like 3 arches in the foot and an inline big toe. So we've got these Laetoli footprints that match the morphology of other Australopith specimens that we found and represent an individual, a set of individuals with biomechanics that are intermediate between chimpanzees and modern humans, albeit more similar to humans than to chimpanzees. You know, I don't like the word Clarence, but this sure seems transitional to me. And then I would show images from the paper, which you can see here. Laetoli footprints reveal bipedal gait biomechanics different from those of modern humans and chimpanzees. And I would scroll down specifically to this one image that I really like, that I think illustrates the point quite well, which is here. We see a human footprint, modern human footprint on the far left. On the far right is a modern chimpanzee, and the Laetoli footprints are there in the middle, intermediate, but still more similar to humans than they are to chimpanzees. And then Clarence's friends would probably throw rocks at him for making the class look bad. The next question is on general Australopithecus afarensis morphology, and I'm really excited for it because I know we're going to see some of the greatest hits, quips in this one.
There she is. These are replicas of Lucy, the best example we have of human evolution.
Oh, that's not so much. So? I had no idea.
Creationists think that Lucy is all we have, and I think they have like a hypnotic mind block that prevents them from learning about any other Australopith.
They pulled hundreds of bones out of 20 feet of dirt over a 164-foot area.
But her bones actually refute evolution.
Okay, Paul, if you know so much, why don't you come on up here and tell us all about it?
Yes, Clarence, come teach the class.
As you can see, they could only find 5 of her skull fragments.
If you can't treat the lab material with respect, you will get out of the lab. Now go, be gone from me.
The rest of it here, the white areas, all up to the imagination.
So this is something that I actually point out to my students when we're teaching Australopithecus, the genus, that Lucy's skull as a specimen is remarkably incomplete as compared to some of the other Australopiths that we have. And then I point them to the other material that's sitting on the table, like Australopithecus africanus, Australopithecus sediba, and other members of species Australopithecus afarensis, which are, as you can hopefully appreciate, complete. This would be like telling a forensic scientist who found portions of a human skull in the woods that he can't possibly know that that belonged to a human. It's like, yes, we can know that because we have other human skulls to compare it to.
Then, her neck vertebrae. The only problem is, you only found one, and it's not hers. It actually belongs to an ancient Ardipithecus, which is a monkey, not an ape.
It is true that a Theropithecus thoracic vertebra was originally assigned to Lucy, even though Johansen and colleagues noted that it was of a different texture and perhaps shouldn't be assigned to the rest of the specimen. But when you look at this sort of superior view of the thoracic vertebra from various genera, you can see perhaps why. So here's Lucy here on the left compared with Homo sapiens. You can see that they're very similar. And here is Lucy compared to Papio, a modern baboon. You can see why this mistake was initially made. And mistakes do happen in science. But what's cool about this particular mishap is that it caused a lot of scrutiny to be applied to other specimens. We looked more closely at our entire fossil record with regard to the hominins, and it showed that people were willing to admit that they were wrong about something. For me, it increased my faith in paleoanthropology, and it increased my faith in the current specimens that we have, given they all passed the test and do indeed appear to belong to the same species now that a second look has been given.
Next, her pelvis. They actually believe that she walked upright because of her pelvis.
We think Australopiths walked upright because of their pelvises. Yes, they have the sagittally oriented iliac blades that gives their pelvis a nice bowl shape to strengthen the gluteal muscles in the pelvic floor, but we also know that they walked upright because of the other characteristics that I've been teaching you here in class, like the anterior foramen magnum with a forward angle, the valgus knee, and the foot morphology, so an inline big toe and 3 arches. I will repeat this as many times as necessary until you commit it to memory, Clarence.
But when they found it, it was crushed. So what they did is they reassembled it using a power saw to make it look like she walked upright.
Contrary to the intentional deceit that many creationists assign to the paleoanthropological community, this is simply not what happened. Lucy's pelvis was crushed, as many fossil specimens are when we uncover them, but the reason that it was reassembled, and it wasn't the original fossil that was reassembled, it was a cast of the original fossil, was because it was found in an anatomically impossible position. If the original state of the pelvis when it was dug up was the state that the organism had it in when it was alive, it could not have moved at all. Anatomically impossible means the organism cannot function with it in its current shape, which is why it was reassembled into an anatomically feasible position. And the only anatomically feasible position that it could be put into, given the amount of bone that was present, was one of a biped. And interestingly enough, this is not the only pelvis of an Australopith that we have found, and every subsequent Australopith pelvis has confirmed that the reconstruction of Lucy's pelvis was the correct one.
It seems like your best evidence for evolution is missing a few pieces.
Clarence, you know I have a strict no quipping rule in this classroom. After all, this is a lab, not a Marvel movie, but this is especially the case when the quips are inaccurate. The next question is on Homo habilis.
So, wait, they didn't find a single one?
Technically, they haven't found any complete Homo habilis skeletons, not even close to complete.
There are very few organisms in the entire fossil record that are 100% complete, but it doesn't need to be 100% complete to be incredibly informative. This is the case with Homo habilis. For instance, take the complete skull of this specimen of Homo habilis, KNM ER 1813. It has some characteristics that are incredibly primitive. For instance, it's still kind of snouty. It's more prognathic than modern humans. The brain case size is within the range of earlier Australopiths, and there are aspects of its teeth that indeed align it with much more primitive or basal members of genus Homo. But there are some aspects that absolutely clock it as a member of genus Homo. Overall, its face shape is incredibly familiar. It is less prognathic than what came before, and the brain case size is increasing compared to some of the earlier hominins.
Even though Homo habilis, or handyman, is one of the better known icons of human evolution, they found about 100 bone fragments they assigned to Homo habilis.
But in our textbooks, in our museums, and even online, they're shown looking complete.
Yes, this is because we have enough of Homo habilis to generally know what it looked like. We have several skulls that let us know what its face likely looked like, as well as the fact that it moved bipedally due to the location and angle of the foramen magnum. And we have enough of the postcrania to get an idea of its limb proportions, how it may have stood, and its general size. As far as its skin color and how much fur it may have had, that's a little bit more dicey, admittedly. However, the molecular clock and certain genes for body hair coverage can be incredibly informative when trying to suss out when these characteristics may have disappeared.
They have human eyes and eye whites, which apes don't have.
Oh shit, here we go again.
You, sir, are wrong on that point, but if I had a nickel for every time I'd heard a creationist say it, I would be a very rich ape indeed.
And then, down later on in our textbook, it says that Homo habilis was becoming human because they used stone tools nearby.
Clarence, could you please read verbatim from the textbook where it says that? Additionally, Homo habilis is associated with stone tools at more than one site.
But how do we know if those were used by them, or rather used on them?
We don't. They have found thousands of bones from other butchered animals in the same area. They even found a 12-foot circular hut foundation in the same rock bed.
Well, given Homo habilis was capable of using tools, is frequently found with tools, and is never found alongside Homo sapiens with tools, I think it's pretty fair to say that Homo habilis was the one utilizing the tools. And given we also find butchered animal carcasses, it's probably fair to say Homo habilis also did the butchering. As far as the circular huts go, citation needed.
That, to me, sounds like modern humans were living there, eating and butchering animals like Homo habilis. I don't think they were evolving.
Okay.
The next question has us examining a much earlier hominin, a hominin that lived before Australopithecus, called Ardipithecus ramidus. And it's just a wrong question. They just get everything wrong about it. So I'm just going to let it play out for you, and then we'll briefly talk about it.
Ardi is significant because we believe she walked upright based on where her spine enters her skull.
Was the skull complete, like shown in the Science Journal?
Actually, no. They reconstructed it from over 110 bone fragments found over a 30-foot area.
Right. So how did her spine enter her skull from the pieces they found? 'Cause, I mean, there's not much to go on there. Did they find any neck vertebrae?
Well, actually, again, no. We have no neck vertebrae.
So let me get this straight. So they have no base of the skull, they guessed on where the spine entered the skull, and they have no neck vertebrae?
Wrong on all counts. Ardipithecus ramidus is known from more than just the one specimen, but even the one specimen has portions of the basicranium that are preserved, and most importantly, portions of the foramen magnum that are preserved. Now, I don't know what's been in the water with creationists lately, but you don't need the neck vertebra, the cervical vertebrae, in order to tell whether or not the foramen magnum is indicative of bipedalism or not. The foramen magnum is the hole where the spinal cord exits. So if it is anterior, that is to say located forward and angled forward as well, the animal couldn't not be a biped. But moreover, we actually do have cervical vertebra from Ardipithecus ramidus, the species. They're just found in Gona. Clarence, you ought to be expelled for all of your misinformation.
Mr. Electric, send him to the principal's office and have him expelled!
The last question that I am physically capable of covering today due to my rising blood pressure is their Neanderthal conversation.
So here's what they were doing in 1909.
Those hats are fire.
Up here, please. Yes, the picture from 1909 I was trying to show is this one. For years, scientists have portrayed Neanderthals as gorilla-like cavemen, kind of like a last step between ape-like creatures and humans. But nowadays, they probably looked more like this.
Hey, cute man do.
What? What?
Why are they still being used as evidence for ape-like creatures turning into humans? I mean, they seem much more advanced than many ancient people groups.
Oh yeah, Clarence? Like which ones?
Don't we all know somebody with those well-defined deep eyebrows?
Who do you know that has the deep eyebrows? He's referring to the large brow ridge, along with the occipital bun, a retromolar gap, and a large nasal aperture, in addition to swept back zygomatics. Who do you know with all of those? Clarence, bring them to me. We've also sequenced the Neanderthal genome, and we know that they fall outside the anatomically modern human range, so they are in fact genetically distinct. They can still interbreed with humans, this we know for sure, although there may have been hybrid sterility. We're not 100% positive on that one, but lions and tigers can also interbreed and produce fertile offspring. Does that mean they're the same thing?
Right? I mean, they also had jewelry, they had musical instruments, weaponry, medicine, artwork. Scientists are still trying to replicate a type of glue they used for their weaponry.
Neanderthals were capable of a lot. They are our closest relative with regard to the hominins.
I even heard that the Neanderthals lived with, had families with, and were buried with modern humans. So to me that settles it. I think they're just humans.
It sure does.
During portions of the year, grizzly bears and polar bears occupy the same range, and they are in fact interfertile. They can produce pizzly bears, so I would contend that grizzly bears just are polar bears. This is obviously silly as a line of reasoning. Neanderthals are morphologically and genomically distinct from Homo sapiens, this much we know, so claiming that they're just humans is kind of a vapid thing to say, to be honest. Well, that's about all I've got in me for these questions. I realize this video very quickly deteriorated from me trying to answer these questions politely as if we were in a classroom setting to sassily quipping, violating my own rule, at these students. But honestly, I just can't stand Genesis apologetics. These questions are not being asked in earnest, right? There's so much information in the questions themselves that is incorrect so as to strawman paleoanthropology in an effort to sound like a gotcha. I very much doubt any of these questions would work on anybody who's taken a class in biological anthropology or biology generally, but I don't really think the point is that they're actually asked to people who know the answers to these questions. The point is that they sound good and reassure creationists that they have a leg to stand on. This is why they're asking other creationists pretending to be anthropologists or biologists these questions instead of just asking actual professionals. So, my gentle and of course very modern apes, if you like what I do, if you like this kind of filler content, while you wait for bigger debunking videos or educational videos to come from me, don't forget to do the free way of supporting me, which is liking, commenting, and subscribing. And if you really like what I do, you can also support me on Patreon. You get your name in the end, and sometimes you get access to videos that is early if I'm actually ahead of schedule, which sometimes does happen. So you guys, I'll see you real soon next time we meet. But take care of yourselves in the meantime.